So welcome everyone. Welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining me on well, in New Jersey, it's a pleasant afternoon. I'm not sure in Minnesota, but either way, I'm hoping that you've had an informative conference so far, and I'm glad that you're spending a little time with me. So today we're going to be talking about maximizing your program's effectiveness through learning self-awareness. And I always like to give you a sense of the agenda. So we're going to be talking about 5 different things: understanding what self-awareness as a learner is, and you can expect to raise your own learning awareness by identifying your key learning behaviors. And you'll then be able to apply that self-awareness in working with your students, and then observe how your students can use their new self-awareness with personalized strategies. And then in the end, hopefully we still have enough time so you can see kind of what that impact looks like or sounds like. So how do we at Let Me Learn define what learning self-awareness is? And I probably should give you one other note, is that I'm the executive director of a nonprofit organization called Let Me Learn, and we have been around for 28 years now, and we have only done one thing, which is to help people understand how they learn and how to use that information with intention. So, sorry, moving right along. Learning self-awareness involves that students believe they can learn and that they can then take responsibility for making learning work for themselves. And that students then use their learning processes to decode a task and develop personalized strategies to guide them in completing assignments successfully. But it also involves instructors. So instructors and students, when they know each other's learning processes and communicate and interact and reflect using that knowledge, that also creates and reinforces their learning self-awareness. And that the teachers can coach a student to use their individual learning processes to meet that specific learning objective. At Let Me Learn, we, like I've said, for 28 years have helped instructors and tutors connect to their students' learning self-awareness by answering the basic question, how do we learn? So everyone has a brain, and your brain is an organ. So it needs to be hydrated and nourished and rested. And your brain receives information in only 5 ways, which is your 5 senses. And then it processes that stimuli and sends it to your mind through 4 filters. Now, we call these filters learning processes, and we've named them after the work that they do. So that sequence brings order to your life, and precision brings information to your life. Technical reasoning brings problem solving to your life, and confluence brings change and new chances, say with me in your offices now, to your life. But your mind is not an organ. It's instead made up of your human consciousness. So it has no physical presence, but it is exceedingly important because it makes it possible for you to think, to take action, and develop feelings about what you are experiencing. So if we were to take one of these filters, the patterns, and spliced it, this is what you would see. We call this the crankshaft of motivation. You have thoughts and actions and feelings within each pattern. And so when your thoughts and your actions work together, you have an informed effort. And when your actions and your feelings are working together, you have an engaged effort. Or if they're not working together, it's a disengaged effort. But that reflective effort is when you are mulling that over about what you are feeling, those emotions. So that cognition, conation, and affectation are real things. And when you have those 3 voices in just one learning pattern, and then you multiply that by 4, this is what metacognition looks like. This is the chatter, because each of those voices talk to each other. And the volume of those voices is determined by the degree to which you use each of your learning processes. So we're going to come back to this diagram. Your mind does, as I've said before, it's very important and does important work. So it changes the stimuli into letters and numbers, Braille, a lot of other symbols. And it stores this information into your working memory. And then that equips you to make decisions, complete tasks, and to live successfully. Your mind works best when you use your learning processes with intention. So whereas other theories have you defined as one thing, and therefore you can only do one thing, our research, which has been constant, really shows that when you are able to use all four of your learning processes, even if you struggle to understand directions, you still can understand directions. It just may take more work for you than for others. But you can absorb directions, or sorry, understand directions or absorb them, and absorb information, and you can solve problems, and you can decide what new challenges and risks to take. So now we're going to identify your key learning behaviors. So we have taken our 28 years of experience and distilled it into a web-based app called the Personal Learning Coach. And so I am inviting you, in the chat, there should be the link. You can just click on the link. Or if you like doing things more difficultly like I do, you can open up a browser and type in the address personallearningcoach.com, and you will see this. And what you'll do is you will click on Get Started Now, and you will say that you are with an institution. So when you are signing up, you will say that you are with an institution, and you're going to fill in this information, and you're going to fill in the form, and you will use the institutional code LAN22, and it is case sensitive. So it will need to be all capital letters. And I'm going to come back to these directions in just a minute, but I want to say a couple of things here, because what you're going to be doing is taking an inventory, and this inventory is something that took 6 years to develop with 3,000 individuals, children and adults, both in the United States and Europe. So it is an internationally validated inventory. And I want to stress that it's an inventory. It's not a test, it's not an assessment, and this is not based on personality. So, that's important for you to understand, because there's not necessarily any right or wrong answers. What you will find is the degree to which you use each of your learning processes. So I'm going to go back just really quick here to the directions. Right, so we'll go, you can click on the link, or you can open up a browser, and you will see, you can go to personallearningcoach.com. You'll click on Get Started. You'll click on the institution button. You will fill this in. You will notice that there is an age range. So when you click on that, the inventory itself, we have 4 versions, 3 based on age, and then we worked on with the Maryland's Department of Labor's Office of Adult Literacy, worked with us to develop an adult basic education, an ABE version of the LCI. And so, but in this case, I would ask that you choose a correct age for yourself. Now is not the time to relive your childhood. And then you can select, if you really want to challenge yourself, you're welcome to select a language. We actually have a European partner we've been working with for the last year, and we actually have the LCI and aspects of the website available in Spanish and Italian, German, and Maltese, as well as English. And we're working on the Albanian, Greek, and Arabic and French. So which, I'm just nerdy enough to be excited about that. Okay, so when you get to this part about taking the LCI, so you'll scroll down to the end of the screen, you'll click on taking the LCI, and then I'm going to let you have at it. There are 28 statements and 3 open-ended questions. This should take about 10 minutes to complete. And you can see it's a Likert scale, so you get to define what never ever means to you and always means to you, and anywhere in between. And sometimes is an appropriate answer, but it's not the island of indecision, because there's only 28 statements. If you give me sometimes too frequently, we might not get, or more than likely, will be challenged to get a valid read. So please think carefully about this. If you find a statement is not to your liking, then you can actually click on the little pencil icon and change the statement. So if you wanted to, let's say this first statement said, I like to fix cars, and you don't like fixing cars, but you like fixing phones, and you can change the word cars to phones. But what I'd ask is that you not change the nature of the action. So you would not change that from I like to fix cars to I like to paint cars, crash cars, race cars, sell cars. I think that's about all I'd want you to do with a car. Certainly not crash. Anyway, so one thing that we've actually added in the last 3 weeks is audio. So for those who, for your students, at some point when we were working with the South Baltimore Learning Center, we kind of had a cutoff about who could be using this because of their own reading level. But now that we have audio, so it will read each statement. It won't read the answers, but that should be okay. But it will read the statements. So if you have someone that you're working with whose reading level is very, very low, they can still have this read to them. So I want to give you 10 minutes, and we'll come back. I'm just going to mute myself. And if you have any questions, just put them in the chat. I'll be happy to answer them as quickly as I can. All right, I would say about 75% of you have been able to complete it. And so I do want to move on to the next bit because so you have the inventory itself and you've completed that, or hopefully been able to complete that. If you get an error message, more than likely it will be because you haven't really committed enough to an answer. So the inventory itself is dependent on you to have some variation. If you have too many times that it is never, ever, or almost never, then you will want to look at that statement again and think if there's a way to change it so that it's more in the affirmative than what it is. That's one way of looking at it. The other would be if you don't put in never, or always, that could also lead to a lack of variation. But here's the thing. And in fact, I think I'm going to do this. I'm going to go off script. Why not? So when you look at your LCI, these are my answers. The reason why we ask for the 3 open-ended questions is so that it is a way for us to be able to validate the inventory. So sometimes you might get a score, and the scores are, yes, they're numbers, but I don't want you to think of them as the higher the better or the lower the worse. That's not how this functions. But when we're able to see what you say in your own words, then we are able to either move. There might be some other clues as to which learning process that you are using, or which of all 4 of them are you using. And so that's one of the reasons why we have this. So this is in essence a self-validating inventory. But the reason why the next bit is important is your personal learning profile. So this is who I am as a learner. And when you get to this point, and I apologize that you have to keep scrolling down a lot. That is just modern web design, unfortunately. You will see that you have statements for each of your patterns. And these statements are different from each other based on the degree to which you use them. So if you use sequence first, you're at a use first level, you are going to be seeing statements like this. If you use it as needed, or if you avoid, you have completely different statements. And so the reason why we have this is so that you can choose the statements that you feel fit you. And I know there's at least 1 or 2 of you who use precision at a use first and technical reasoning at a use first. Okay, obviously I avoid this, but so I'm going to use this as an example. If you use precision and technical reasoning at a use first level, which is your natural go-to, one of the aspects of precision is that it is the pattern or learning process of the most words, and technical reasoning is the opposite. One of the aspects of technical reasoning is that it's the pattern of fewest words. Now, if this was something that was you take it and it tells you who you are and how you learn, it cannot choose between those 2 because it can't be both. You can't be a person of few and lots of words. So this is an opportunity for you to express how your learning processes manifest themselves in you. So that's one of the reasons, that's one of the key reasons that we have the personal learning profile. So I'm going to go back to the presentation because as you can tell from my sequence, I'm really not great at, I've done this presentation enough that I can go off script for a little bit. But the idea is that you are affirming your own learning, and you are also having an opportunity to describe yourself to others in layperson terms. That is really the important part of this. So when you can use your personal learning profile in a job interview, you can use it when you're building teams with each other, because then you can actually have things that make sense rather than Whereas personality, where Myers-Briggs and has the letters and I don't know what they mean. But so if you told me that, I would be like, okay. But and I would feel the same way if you said, well, I'm a 33, 34, 12, and 11. I don't know what that means. So if I didn't know anything about the Let Me Learn process, I would be very confused. But here you have an opportunity to be able to describe your own learning processes in words that actually make sense to the rest of the world. All right, sorry. This is what happens when I jump ahead of myself. So then how can you use this in working with your students? Well, okay. So you can apply yourself as a learner if you have a writing assignment or a math assignment or a reading assignment. Yeah, if sequence is called for, you can provide directions that are clear, that are simple, and that are step by step. And you can lead the practice of the steps, not once or twice, but multiple times. And you can also be patient with your students' need to repeat and rehearse. I was working with a professor at Alvin Community College, and just outside of Texas, or outside of Houston, in Texas. And he avoids sequence. And he always felt that he did not like giving examples because that was training wheels for his students, and that they would never get off the training wheels. And I said, well, let me explain to you from my perspective as someone who does use sequence first. I need to see an example so I know how to rehearse correctly. And once I've rehearsed this enough, then I will feel comfortable to be able to move on to the next thing. And so it is important for you to understand that aspect as well for others. Now, we'll also say this: if you would like, there will be an enhanced version of this presentation. I only have 45 minutes, so there's more information that I've put in the same presentation, just larger, and where I explain about what is that voice, those voices in each of the patterns. So you would see what sequence hears and feels and thinks. And so, thinks, feels, and does. So if you have not gone into the personal learning coach but would like to have this presentation or the enhanced presentation, just go ahead and put your email address and your name in the chat. But in the meantime, we're just going to keep moving forward here. So if precision is called for, you can provide accurate information and allow time for that information to be recorded and absorbed and be questioned or ask questions about it. And you can let your learners work with the information by discussing it, using their own words to explain what they understand, and then embedding that into their working memory. For technical reasoning, you can provide less talk and more action. Those who like to, one of the aspects of technical reasoning is that it has to be real, it has to be practical, and I don't really want to talk about it. Again, pattern of fewest words. So you can provide that less talk and a little more action. You can provide those, if you're doing math, then word problems that actually are relevant instead of hypothetical, like abstract hypotheticals. Okay. And then you can answer their questions with fewer words and less frill, something I could certainly work on. And for those who, you can put that subject matter into concrete context. Confluence is, for those who use Confluence first, you have an easier time at seeing a big picture, taking a risk. Both of those are things that I am not great at. I'm not even adequate at. So, but I work at it. But you can provide different opportunities to listen to different perspectives, to different insights, just not necessarily sticking to the agenda too tightly, and that if you can understand that individual learners experience the effects of that stimuli differently, and therefore they can formulate their holistic conclusions intuitively, which is something that I would not have thought of. I will share this story. I'm full of stories. we have a charter school in Southern New Jersey, and we are hiring for a school custodian. And this custodian probably does not have the knowledge base that we would normally look for, but and thankfully the people interviewing him, there were others besides myself who learned very differently. And so the issue of solving problems was something I would never have thought of. And so because my precision, through the lens of my precision, I'm thinking you need to know things in order to be on this job. And I limit myself by thinking that way instead of saying, well, can this person learn those skills on the job? Do we really need to have an expert on the first day? And the answer to that is no. And so thankfully, thankfully we have, like I said, other people who had a very different perspective as to that interview process and that the interview results. So anyway, again, just another practical example, real life example of how I know about my own limitations in terms of my use of Confluence. And I definitely appreciate when others can help me see beyond that. Now you can work this way with your students. The other option is, and I'm not saying that you can't do that, but if your students, let's say you had a sample ABE math assignment. So you actually, let's hold on here. I'm going to send something to you. You're going to see this in just a minute. Sorry. All right. And now, right. So most of you should have this already. You will have this assignment, the sample ABE math assignment. This is something that came out of South Baltimore Learning Center. So I'm not sure. I don't know how many people are inviting 24 kids to a party, but post-COVID. But regardless, this is a real math problem. And what you can do, your students could do, is either you can work with them in terms of understanding how to use each of their learning patterns, using their Confluence to see the big picture, to use their precision to be looking at those words and which words are important and which words aren't important. That using your sequence to organize your approach to solving the word problem. And also, I love this part. Does this answer even make sense? So whatever answer you come up with, is that really realistic? So you can do that. Or if you went into your personal learning coach, you would see on the sidebar, it would say, use your patterns. And you can click on that. Your students could click on that. And you would have a list of these different assignments or tasks that are listed. And you will see the sample ABE math problem. And what it does is it decodes it. So I'm going to just get out of the presentation for a second and jump right into that. So scrolling down, sample ABE math. And this is what it looks like. This is what we call the decoding. So it looks for the terms for each of those learning processes. And then based on what is in the assignment, then you have strategies for each of your learning processes. So in this case, there are, as you can see here, you can see how much sequence is there, technical reasoning, and a little bit of precision. And therefore, just as you had your personal learning profile statements were varied from each other, the same applies for the strategies. So you have at least 12, if not 16. Since there's no Confluence and I avoided, there's no point in having a strategy for something I'm not going to use. But you can see here that the different types of strategies that are being used. And again, they are different from each other. All right, I'm going to go back into the presentation. So again, they can select it, that they are targeted for each of the learning processes, and that they can, because this is web-based, they can use this on a cell phone or on a computer in the classroom. Either way, that works. And so here's a comparison. If for strategies for someone who uses sequence as first, and someone who avoids sequence, that would be the bottom one. You don't want to waste time rereading the problem or reading the problem over and over again. Just read it and get on with it. That's not what the person who avoids sequence is going to struggle with, right? They're going to actually need to take time because they are not going to be inclined to read through all of the directions, right? So there's again a difference in strategies based on how you use your learning processes, and the same kind of thing here for technical reasoning. If you use it first, then you just need to make sure that you're not ignoring the importance of keywords just because words aren't your thing. But for me, as someone who avoids technical reasoning, I could probably use a diagram, and I just wouldn't think of using a diagram to illustrate kind of how would we solve this math problem. All right, last but not least, because this is the home stretch, kids, the home stretch. Understanding how this has a positive effect. It will be a very positive impact on both student engagement and retention. Student engagement, first of all, when you understand how your students in your program learn, it gives you unique insight into them and allows you to connect with your students in a much deeper insight, or have a much deeper insight than just based on appearance. And I want to stress this: it does not matter what your gender is, where you grew up, who your parents were, how many parents you had, your socioeconomic status, your religion, or the color of your skin. Those things do not matter when it comes to your ability to learn. Do those affect your quality of education? Yeah, I think that's been pretty well documented. But it does not affect your ability to learn. I just want that to sink in for a little bit. When we talk about retaining students, when they understand themselves, that they now have confidence in their own ability and are able to complete the course that they are attending, and they can better connect to the academic work as well as the support mechanisms that you might be putting in place for them. Dr. Ellen Beatty, who was at the time a part of the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning for Maryland's Department of Labor, talked about when we were piloting this at the South Baltimore Learning Center, that the students themselves really were the most engaged they'd been in a while, because they were learning about themselves and found value in not only what they were doing, but found value in themselves. And even the person who was the most resistant really was the most positive person after that. Was very, very, very reluctant. And that's why I stress that it's an inventory, not a test, because you don't take this over and over and over again.
Bill, you have about 4 minutes left.
I have 4 minutes. All right.
You do.
Do I have any questions, or these are just no questions so far? That's fine. I just don't want to ignore them if they're there. 4 minutes, 3.5 now. So Mohammed Mosafari, who was at Alvin, previously mentioned Alvin, said when he was working with his students and adult learners in prison, that for the first time in 20 years, that they actually stayed after class just so they could keep discussing what those learning processes meant. Again, it can be a very positive, powerful effect. All right. So where have we made a difference? Well, first of all, we actually recently, last October, published an article in a journal about language acquisition. And it turns out it's a Polish international linguistics journal, which is fascinating that we found them. But so that's our current research. And we have been worked with Maryland's Department of Labor. We work with community colleges and universities, K through 12 schools. We have our own lab school, that's our charter school. And we do work with state and county workforce development programs. We've also been working with the European Union and helping immigrants acculturate to their new society. And we have worked with corporations like DuPont, tiny corporations like DuPont, Playmobil, Adobe, and iMotions in terms of understanding team dynamic, understanding just how to help get work done. And there you go, folks. That's my questions and answers. You have the questions. I've got the answers. I'm just kidding. I may have questions too that you could answer, but that's my contact information. And I greatly appreciate you taking the time today to be with me. Now we have 2 minutes. Who wants to fit in the one question that we can answer in 2 minutes?